Imagine this. You walk into a beautiful hotel ballroom filled with flowers, music, and laughter. Everyone is smiling, raising their glasses, waiting for the bride and groom to appear. But when the doors open and the groom steps in, your heart stops. Because the man standing at the altar isn't just anyone. He's your husband. This is the nightmare that Sarah Miller, a woman from Texas, never thought she'd live through. For 7 years, she believed her marriage was safe. Solid. Happy. She wore her wedding ring with pride, never once questioning the man she had promised forever to. David Miller was charming, successful, and adored by everyone around him. Friends envied Sarah for having such a devoted husband. Family members often told her she was lucky to have him. But luck has a cruel way of running out. At first, Sarah ignored the signs. The late-night business trips that always came at the most inconvenient times. The phone that he never left lying around anymore. The quick excuses whenever she asked too many questions. She told herself she was overthinking, that every couple had rough patches. She trusted David. After all, wasn't trust the foundation of marriage? And then, one ordinary morning, everything changed. Sarah was in the kitchen, sipping her coffee, scrolling through her emails while David packed for yet another conference in Dallas. She barely noticed when a new notification popped up on the screen, until her eyes caught the subject line. Wedding confirmation, the Ritz Hotel, New Orleans. Her heart skipped a beat. She clicked on it, confused. Maybe it was spam. Maybe some kind of mistake. But as the email loaded, her blood ran cold. The details were clear as day. Event, wedding ceremony and reception. Date, September 12, 2025. Location, the Ritz Hotel, New Orleans. Groom, David Miller. Her David. The phone nearly slipped from her hands. She read it again, and again, hoping it was some cruel coincidence. But there it was, undeniable. The email even showed the deposit payment. The credit card used was David's. The same card they used to pay their mortgage. Sarah stood frozen in the kitchen, her coffee mug shattering on the floor as her fingers trembled. The sound of breaking ceramic echoed the shattering of her own world. She wanted to believe it wasn't real. She wanted to believe it was all a mistake. But something inside her, something buried deep, knew the truth. Those late nights. Those excuses. The secrecy. It all suddenly made sense. David wasn't just lying about business trips. He was planning a wedding. A wedding to someone else. Sarah's breath grew shallow, her chest tightening as though the walls around her were closing in. She glanced at the family photos pinned to the fridge, the beach trip where David had kissed her cheek, their wedding portrait where he had smiled like she was the only woman in the world. Lies. Every picture now looked like a cruel joke. Tears blurred her vision, but anger quickly followed. How could he? How could he stand in front of her every single day, look her in the eye, kiss her goodnight, all while secretly building a new life with another woman? Sarah dropped into a chair, staring blankly at the phone screen, unable to move. The words glowed back at her, wedding confirmation. It was undeniable. Unforgivable. And in that moment, Sarah Miller's life split into two. Before the email, she was the loyal wife who believed in love. After the email, she was the woman who would uncover a betrayal so deep it would end not just a marriage, but an entire wedding, in front of hundreds of unsuspecting guests. Because Sarah would not stay silent. Not this time. This was only the beginning. After the shock of the email, Sarah's mind began to replay every small, seemingly insignificant detail from the past year. Things that once felt normal now screamed of betrayal. David had always traveled for work, but it wasn't until recently that the trips became constant. Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, always some conference, some urgent client. Sarah used to pack his shirts, slip love notes into his luggage, and remind him to call her when he landed. But lately, the calls had grown shorter, his voice distracted. He stopped FaceTiming altogether, claiming his hotel Wi-Fi was terrible. At first, Sarah brushed it off. She wanted to be the supportive wife, not the suspicious one. After all, she trusted him. Everyone did. But then came the phone. David used to leave his phone on the counter, charging overnight. Now, it was always in his pocket or face down on the table. Once, Sarah reached for it to check the time, and David nearly snatched it out of her hands. He laughed it off, saying, "Work emails, boring stuff. Don't bother." But Sarah noticed his knuckles tighten around the phone, like he was guarding a treasure. Then there were the payments. One night, Sarah logged into their joint bank account to pay the electricity bill. She noticed a series of Venmo transfers, $200 here, $150 there, all sent to someone named Emily. The messages attached weren't the usual dinner or groceries. Instead, they read, "For our future red heart. Wedding planning clinking glasses. Can't wait ring." Her stomach dropped when she saw them, but she couldn't bring herself to believe it. David had always been generous, always helping friends and coworkers. Maybe Emily was just a colleague, maybe those words meant something else. She wanted so badly to believe that. But then came the excuses. David started disappearing on weekends, saying he had to meet clients out of town. One Saturday, Sarah asked if she could join him. His reaction was instant, too quick. "No, no, honey. These meetings are boring, all business. You'd hate it." The way he said it felt off, like he wasn't shutting her out to protect her from boredom, but to protect himself from being exposed. And then came the lies. Tiny, messy lies that slipped through his polished charm. He'd tell Sarah he was in Dallas, but the gas receipts she found in his car were from Louisiana. He claimed he had dinner with a client, but the restaurant charges on his card were for 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine. And once, when Sarah called his hotel room, the receptionist told her no one by the name of David Miller was checked in. Sarah's chest tightened with every memory. The signs had been there all along, staring her in the face. She had just chosen not to see them. Looking back, the biggest red flag wasn't the trips or the payments or the lies. It was the way David had started looking at her, or rather, the way he didn't. There was a time when David's eyes lit up every time Sarah walked into the room. He'd ask about her day, tease her about her cooking, hold her hand while they watched TV. But lately, his gaze was distant, his touch absent. He'd eat dinner in silence, glued to his phone, and when Sarah spoke, he barely nodded. She had started to feel invisible in her own home. Now, with the email confirmation still burning in her mind, every red flag connected into a single, horrifying truth. Sarah remembered the night before one of his Dallas trips. He had hugged her, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I'll miss you, babe." His suitcase had been waiting by the door, but tucked inside wasn't just business attire, it was a suit, polished shoes, and a tie she had never seen before. At the time, she thought nothing of it. Now she realized, that was his wedding outfit. The betrayal was no longer a theory. It was a fact. Sarah's hands shook as she pulled out the printed receipts she had saved, the Venmo screenshots she had taken, the unanswered hotel calls she had written down. Each piece of evidence was a dagger, cutting away the illusion of the man she thought she knew. Her heart wanted to scream, to confront David right then and there. But her mind whispered something colder, more deliberate: wait. Watch. Gather everything. If he's bold enough to marry another woman while still tied to you, then he deserves to be exposed where it hurts most. Sarah wiped her tears, staring at the wedding confirmation email one last time. The address was right there, the Ritz Hotel, New Orleans. The date circled in bold, September 12, 2025. A date that would mark the end of David's lies, and the beginning of Sarah's revenge. The email had been damning enough, but Sarah still tried to convince herself that maybe, just maybe, she had misread it. People make mistakes. Emails get hacked. There had to be an explanation, at least, that's what she told herself to stay sane. Then came the wedding invitation. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon, tucked inside a cream-colored envelope with gold trim. The postman slid it into Sarah's mailbox, along with grocery flyers and utility bills. She almost didn't notice it at first. But when she pulled it out, the weight of the cardstock, the elegant cursive across the front, "Mr. and Mrs. Robert Whitfield request the honor of your presence," made her pause. Sarah opened it slowly, her fingers trembling. Inside was a neatly printed invitation, the kind brides spend months perfecting. You are cordially invited to celebrate the marriage of Emily Whitfield and David Miller. September 12, 2025. The Ritz Hotel, New Orleans. Her eyes froze on the name, David Miller. Her husband. The room spun around her. She had to grip the edge of the counter to steady herself, the card shaking in her hands. It wasn't just an email anymore. It wasn't just suspicious Venmo transfers or strange phone behavior. It was real. Tangible. The truth dressed up in calligraphy and champagne-colored cardstock. He was actually doing it. He was marrying another woman. Sarah collapsed onto a chair, staring at the invitation like it was written in blood. Her blood. She flipped it over, half expecting some cruel prank note scribbled on the back. But it was clean, pristine, perfect. A celebration of love. His new love. The audacity. The arrogance. To not only cheat, but to stand at an altar in front of hundreds of people and publicly vow himself to another woman while still married to Sarah. Her phone buzzed on the table, startling her. It was a message from her best friend, Julia. Did you see this? Please tell me it's some sick joke. Attached was a screenshot of the very same invitation, posted on Facebook by a mutual acquaintance. Sarah's throat tightened. If Julia knew, if acquaintances knew, then everyone was going to know. The humiliation spread like wildfire in her chest. Her marriage wasn't just ending, it was being erased, rewritten, as if she had never existed. She called Julia immediately, her voice breaking. Did you know? Sarah asked. I swear I didn't, Julia said, frantic. I thought maybe you two divorced quietly or something. But this? Sarah, what the hell is going on? Sarah explained through tears, about the email, the Venmo transfers, the trips that never made sense. Julia listened, her outrage growing louder with every word. That bastard, Julia spat. He's not just cheating, Sarah. He's building a whole new life while you're still in his house. He's planning a wedding while you're making dinner. This is psychotic. Hearing it out loud, Sarah realized Julia was right. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a double life. A coward's fantasy built on lies, designed to discard her like yesterday's news. The rage inside her shifted, crystallizing into something sharper. She could confront David now, scream at him, demand answers. But what good would that do? He'd lie, he'd gaslight, he'd spin excuses until she questioned her own sanity. She knew his games too well. No. This couldn't be private. This couldn't be a quiet confrontation behind closed doors. If David wanted to humiliate her publicly by marrying someone else while still legally tied to her, then Sarah would answer him on the same stage, publicly. She glanced back at the invitation, her hands steady now. The Ritz Hotel, New Orleans. September 12th. Hundreds of guests would be there, champagne flutes in hand, waiting to toast the happy couple. And Sarah would be there too. But not as a guest. As the ghost from his past, the wife he never divorced, the truth he thought he could bury. She could already picture it, the shocked gasps, the whispers rippling through the ballroom, David's face turning pale as she stepped into the aisle. All his careful lies would unravel in seconds. Are you actually thinking of going? Julia asked on the phone, her voice hesitant. Sarah looked down at the invitation, her jaw tight. "I'm not just going," she said. "I'm going to make sure everyone in that room knows exactly who David Miller really is." There was silence for a beat. Then Julia exhaled, a mix of fear and admiration. "Sarah, that's bold. Dangerous, even. But if anyone deserves to burn for this, it's him." Sarah closed the invitation and slid it back into its envelope. She tucked it into her drawer, not to forget, but to keep it safe. A reminder. A weapon. David thought he was walking into a wedding. But on September 12th, he'd be walking into an execution. For the next 3 days, Sarah lived inside a storm. Her heart beat like a war drum each time David walked through the door, each time she heard the jingle of his keys or the sound of his footsteps on the hardwood floor. She couldn't look at him without seeing the gold-trimmed wedding invitation burned into her memory. But she also couldn't confront him right away. Not yet. She needed to see how far he'd go with his lies. She needed to know just how much of his soul had already rotted. On Sunday evening, David came home later than usual. Sarah had set the dinner table, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, his favorite. It wasn't an act of love anymore, it was bait. She wanted him comfortable, unguarded. "Smells amazing," David said as he shrugged off his jacket, pressing a kiss to her cheek. His lips were warm, familiar, and disgusting all at once. Sarah forced a smile, her insides twisting. "Long day?" she asked lightly, pouring him a glass of wine. "The longest," he sighed, sitting down and rubbing his temples. "Work's been insane. Honestly, I'm exhausted. Work. Always work." Sarah studied him closely, the way his eyes avoided hers, the way his phone never left his side. He had grown skilled at the art of omission, never lying outright but never telling the truth either. They ate in silence for a while, the clinking of cutlery filling the air. Finally, Sarah set down her fork. "So. Julia told me she saw something interesting on Facebook." David froze mid-bite. "Oh. What's that?" "A wedding announcement," Sarah said casually, though her pulse pounded in her throat. "The Ritz Hotel. In New Orleans. Next month." His fork clattered against his plate. He looked up, his face carefully neutral, but Sarah caught the flash of panic in his eyes before he masked it with a half-smile. "That's random. Why would Julia send you something like that?" "She thought maybe I'd know about it." Sarah leaned forward, her voice sharp now. "Because the groom's name was David Miller." For a split second, silence swallowed the room. The air was thick with the sound of Sarah's heart hammering in her ears. Then David chuckled. Actually chuckled. "Sarah, come on. Do you know how many David Millers are in this country? It's practically John Smith." "That's not me." Sarah's stomach turned. His lie was smooth, delivered with just enough amusement to make her doubt herself if she hadn't seen the invitation with her own eyes. He was good, too good. "You're telling me it's just a coincidence?" Sarah pressed. "The same name, in the same city you've been traveling to for work, at the exact same time you've been disappearing every other weekend?" David's jaw tightened. "You're paranoid," he snapped, dropping his napkin onto the table. "I've told you before, those trips are for business. Do you want me to pull out receipts, emails, flight details?" "Because I can." "You mean forged ones?" Sarah shot back, her voice trembling with fury. He slammed his palm onto the table, the plates rattling. "Enough, Sarah. I work my ass off to provide for us, and all you can do is accuse me of nonsense. Do you have any idea how exhausting this is? To come home to a wife who doesn't trust me?" The gaslighting was familiar, rehearsed. He was flipping the script, painting himself as the victim. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes, not from doubt, but from rage at his shamelessness. She stood slowly, gripping the back of her chair to steady herself. If you're so innocent, David, why haven't you touched me in months? Why do you guard your phone like it's nuclear codes? And why, her voice cracked, but she forced the words out, why do I have a wedding invitation with your name on it sitting in my drawer right now? David's face drained of color. There it was, the crack in his armor. You're insane, he muttered, standing up, grabbing his jacket. You've completely lost it. Maybe you should talk to someone, get help. I'm done with this conversation. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Sarah stood alone in the silence, her chest heaving. He hadn't denied it. Not really. His words were hollow, frantic, built on sand. She saw the truth written all over his face. And that truth gave her clarity. She would not beg for honesty. She would not plead for scraps of respect. If he wanted to play the role of the devoted groom in front of a ballroom full of people, then she would play the role of his reckoning. As the lock clicked behind him, Sarah whispered into the empty room, "See you in New Orleans, David." The night David stormed out, Sarah didn't sleep. She lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, her chest burning with equal parts fury and determination. His lies were no longer whispers in the shadows, they were bold, shameless, and soon to be public. By morning, Sarah had made a decision, she would go to New Orleans. But she wouldn't just show up, she would prepare. If David wanted to humiliate her by building a double life, then she would dismantle his fantasy in front of everyone who believed his act. Her first step was proof. She pulled the invitation from her drawer and studied it again. The gold lettering shimmered under the kitchen light, "David Miller and Emily Brooks request the honor of your presence." The bride had a name now. Sarah whispered it like a curse. Emily Brooks. She opened her laptop, fingers trembling as she typed the name into Facebook. Dozens of Emily Brooks appeared, but only one matched the city and the wedding venue. A blonde woman with a polished smile, all pearl necklaces and charity galas. Her profile radiated wealth and privilege, the kind of lifestyle David must have been seduced by. Scrolling through Emily's photos, Sarah's stomach twisted. There he was, David. Her husband. Smiling beside Emily at what looked like a family gathering. His hand rested on Emily's back, intimate and confident, as though he belonged there. The comments were full of heart emojis, congratulations, and, perfect couple, praises. Sarah slammed her laptop shut, bile rising in her throat. The betrayal was deeper than she had imagined. He hadn't just lied to her, he had woven himself into another woman's life, another family's world. He wasn't living a secret fling, he was living a secret marriage. Sarah took a deep breath. "Fine," she whispered. "Let's give them a show." Her next step was logistics. She called her sister, Julia, under the guise of a casual chat. "Thinking of taking a little trip next month," Sarah said, forcing lightness into her voice. "Maybe New Orleans. Could use a change of scenery." "Ooh, Mardi Gras," Julia teased. "Or something more romantic." Sarah's throat tightened, but she kept her tone breezy. "Just, felt like visiting somewhere different. I'll send you the dates." She couldn't risk telling Julia the truth, not yet. Julia had a big heart and a loud mouth, and Sarah needed silence until the right moment. After hanging up, Sarah booked a hotel just blocks away from the Ritz. She used her own credit card, but under her maiden name, to avoid any trace David might stumble upon. Then she purchased a dress, not the kind of cocktail dress a wedding guest would wear, but something striking, unforgettable. A deep crimson gown, bold as blood, with a slit up the leg and a neckline that dared people to stare. If she was going to walk into that ballroom, she would not be invisible. She would be unforgettable. Still, Sarah knew appearance wasn't enough. She needed evidence to shatter David's lies in front of everyone. She reopened her laptop and printed every damning photo she could find, David's arm around Emily, his smile at her side, their tagged locations together. She highlighted the wedding announcement, adding it to a growing folder labeled Truth. But that wasn't all. Sarah reached out to a private investigator, a quiet man named Harris, recommended discreetly through an online forum for spouses dealing with infidelity. Over the phone, she explained only the basics. "My husband is leading a double life," she said. "He's planning a wedding. I need details, and I need them fast." Harris's voice was calm, efficient. "Give me the name. I'll have something within a week." When she hung up, Sarah felt a flicker of power return to her. For weeks she had been drowning in betrayal, but now she was swimming toward a purpose. At night, she rehearsed. Standing in front of the mirror, she imagined the ballroom, the guests, the gasp of horror as she strode in. She practiced her words, shaping them like knives. "My name is Sarah Miller. I'm David's wife. And he's not just betraying me, he's betraying every single one of you." She pictured Emily's face, shock, disbelief, devastation. Part of Sarah's heart ached for her, because Emily too was just a victim in this cruel theater. But Sarah knew the truth had to come out, no matter how painful. By the end of the week, Harris called back. His findings confirmed what Sarah already knew, but seeing it written down, documented, made her breath catch. David had rented an apartment in New Orleans under a fake lease. He had met Emily's family multiple times, presenting himself as a successful businessman. And yes, the wedding at the Ritz was very real. Sarah thanked Harris, her voice steady, though her hands shook as she hung up. The pieces were falling into place. She wasn't just going to attend that wedding. She was going to turn it into David's funeral, the death of his lies, the collapse of the double life he thought he could sustain. In the quiet of her bedroom, Sarah zipped the crimson gown into a garment bag and whispered to herself, "New Orleans, here I come." And for the first time in weeks, she smiled. The train screeched to a halt, and Sarah felt her stomach tighten as the conductor called out, "New Orleans, Union Passenger Terminal." The air inside the cabin smelled of coffee and old leather, but as she stepped down onto the platform, a wave of hot, humid air wrapped around her like a second skin. The city buzzed with a rhythm all its own, street musicians played saxophones in the distance, vendors shouted over the crowd, and tourists dragged rolling suitcases, their laughter echoing off the high arches of the station. Sarah clutched the handle of her small suitcase, her crimson gown packed neatly inside, her folder of evidence tucked deep between layers of clothes. Each step toward the exit felt heavier, like her shoes were made of lead. She wasn't here for jazz clubs or beignets. She was here for war. She checked into a modest boutique hotel 2 blocks from the Ritz. The receptionist handed her a brass key, smiling warmly, oblivious to the storm churning inside the woman standing before her. Her room was small but charming, with French windows that opened onto a narrow balcony overlooking a lively street. Sarah set her suitcase on the bed and pushed open the windows. The air carried scents of fried food, perfume, and something smoky, mischief, maybe. She gripped the iron railing and stared at the spire of the Ritz rising just a few streets away. Its presence loomed like a fortress, guarding the life David had built without her. The sight lit a fire in her chest. That evening, Sarah wandered through the French Quarter, needing to move, to breathe. Couples strolled hand in hand, street performers juggled flaming batons, and neon lights bathed the cobblestone streets in color. It should have been magical, but every smiling face reminded her of Emily, blissfully unaware of the betrayal woven into her perfect wedding day. She ducked into a quiet cafe and ordered a coffee, her nerves too wired for wine. Sitting in the corner, she opened her folder, flipping through the photos of David and Emily again. Her hands trembled, not with doubt, but with the weight of what she was about to do. She wasn't just confronting David, she was stepping into a room full of strangers, all of whom thought they knew him. And she was going to shatter that illusion with her presence. For a fleeting second, she wondered, what if I walked away? What if I just let him have his new life and built my own far from his lies? But then she remembered the way he had gaslit her, calling her paranoid, insane. She remembered the months of distance, the loneliness of sharing a bed with a stranger. And she thought of Emily, an innocent woman walking into a trap she didn't deserve. No. Walking away wasn't justice. Justice meant truth. The next morning, Sarah woke early. She stood before the mirror in the hotel bathroom, practicing her lines again, whispering them like prayers. Her reflection looked different now, sharper, stronger. Not the Sarah who had cried into her pillow. This Sarah was steel wrapped in silk. She spent the day watching the Ritz from a distance. Guests in elegant attire arrived steadily, carrying garment bags and suitcases, their laughter trailing behind them. Sarah spotted David once, across the street, as he climbed out of a black car. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his hair perfectly styled, his smile dazzling as he shook hands with a group of men she didn't recognize. Her pulse raced, and she ducked behind a column, heart hammering in her ears. There he was. Her husband. Acting like the king of a kingdom that wasn't his. For a moment, she almost screamed his name. Almost marched across the street and tore the mask off his smug face. But no, that would ruin everything. The stage wasn't ready. Tomorrow would be the performance. Back in her room, Sarah laid the crimson gown across the bed. She ran her fingers over the fabric, imagining how the silk would cling to her as she walked into the ballroom. She slipped on her heels and practiced standing tall, shoulders back, chin high. She rehearsed her entrance like a soldier preparing for battle. She poured herself a glass of wine and stood on the balcony, staring at the glowing city below. The laughter and music floated upward, but her mind was locked on tomorrow. She imagined the silence that would fall when she appeared. The gasps. Emily's face crumpling in betrayal. David's mask shattering. The thought should have comforted her. Instead, it left her shaking. Because beneath the anger, there was grief. She had loved him once, loved him enough to believe in forever. Tomorrow would be the day she buried that love in front of everyone. The bells of St. Louis Cathedral chimed in the distance, carrying through the humid night air. Sarah lifted her glass in a silent toast. To the truth, she whispered. No matter how much it hurts. She drained the wine, set the glass down, and closed the balcony doors. Tomorrow, the curtain would rise. And Sarah would be ready. The morning of the wedding broke heavy and humid, the kind of southern heat that clung to the skin like a second layer. Sarah woke before dawn, her heart already racing as though it knew the stage she was about to step onto. For a moment she lay still, listening to the hum of the ceiling fan, her hands clenched in the sheets. This was it. The day her life would split into before and after. She rose slowly, moving with deliberate calm. On the small hotel vanity sat her garment bag, the crimson gown waiting like a weapon. She touched the zipper, running her fingers along its edge, almost reverent. Tonight, it would be her armor. But first, she needed strength. Sarah pulled on jeans and a simple blouse, then slipped downstairs to the hotel cafe. The streets of New Orleans were already alive, tourists snapping photos, carriages rattling over cobblestones, street vendors setting up shop. The city didn't care about her war. It sang, oblivious, like it always had. She ordered coffee, black, and sat by the window. Every sip burned down her throat, grounding her. Across the street, she could see the Ritz, grand, immaculate, its marble facade glowing in the early light. Inside, she knew, the staff was already bustling, florists arranging centerpieces, bakers stacking tiers of white cake, planners fussing over ribbons and linens. And somewhere in that gilded chaos, David was getting ready. Smiling. Laughing. Believing that by sundown, he'd slip a ring onto another woman's finger without consequence. Sarah clenched her jaw. Not today. By late morning, she returned to her room. She showered, the water pounding her shoulders, and let herself cry, just for a moment. Not for David, not for the life they'd shared, but for the version of herself that had once believed in him. That Sarah deserved a farewell, too. When the tears were spent, she dried off and began the ritual. Foundation, eyeliner, lipstick the color of wine. Each stroke of makeup was careful, intentional. She wasn't masking pain, she was painting power. By the time she finished, her reflection looked back at her with cold resolve. Then came the gown. She unzipped the bag, the crimson fabric unfurling like a river of blood. Slipping it over her skin, Sarah felt transformed. The silk clung to her curves, the slit daring, the neckline bold. She slipped on her heels, tall enough to command attention but steady enough to walk into battle. Finally, she gathered her folder, the photos, the printouts, the proof. She slid them into a sleek clutch, the kind of bag meant for galas, not war zones. Yet inside it was dynamite. She stood before the mirror one last time. "You're not here to beg," she whispered to her reflection. "You're here to end this." Downstairs, the hotel lobby buzzed with tourists. A couple paused to admire her dress, whispering in awe. Sarah lifted her chin higher. Good. Let them stare. Tonight, the whole ballroom would. She hailed a cab, giving the driver the address of the Ritz. As the car wound through the streets, she passed bridesmaids in matching robes laughing on balconies, photographers snapping pictures of bouquets, children tossing petals into the air. The city seemed drunk on love and celebration. Her driver glanced in the rearview mirror. Big event today, huh? The Ritz wedding? Sarah's throat tightened. She forced a smile. Something like that. At the Ritz, the entrance was a flurry of activity. Guests in designer suits and sparkling gowns flowed into the lobby, their laughter echoing against marble columns. Bellhops wheeled carts stacked with luggage and garment bags. The air smelled of roses and champagne. Sarah stepped out of the cab, her crimson dress a stark contrast against the sea of pastel gowns and black tuxedos. Heads turned. Conversations paused. For a brief second, she felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her, and she welcomed it. Let them look. Let them wonder who she was. Inside, the ballroom was a cathedral of decadence. Chandeliers dripped with crystals, tables glowed with candlelight, and an archway of white roses framed the altar where David would soon stand. Sarah's chest tightened, but she steadied herself. She wasn't here for beauty. She was here for justice. She slipped into a corner seat at the back, unnoticed for now. From this vantage point, she could see everything, the altar, the guests, the musicians tuning their instruments. Then, movement at the front caught her eye. David entered the room, wearing a suit more expensive than any he'd ever owned during their marriage. His smile was wide, his posture confident. He shook hands, hugged relatives, played the role of the perfect groom. Sarah's nails dug into her clutch. He hadn't seen her yet. But soon, he would. And when he did, everything would come crashing down. The string quartet began to play, soft notes floating through the gilded ballroom like whispers of promise. Guests turned in their seats, a hush falling over the room as the ceremony began. Sarah, seated near the back, felt her pulse quicken with every chord, every rustle of fabric. Her crimson dress burned under the chandeliers, a solitary flame in a sea of pastels and silks. At the front, David stood tall, every inch the charming groom. His dark suit was flawless, his hair sculpted into perfection. He smiled easily, laughing with the groomsmen, patting his best man on the back. From where she sat, Sarah could almost forget who he really was. Almost. But then he adjusted his cufflinks, a small, nervous gesture she'd seen 1,000 times at business dinners, birthdays, even funerals. And just like that, she remembered, beneath the polished facade was the same man who had kissed her goodnight for years, the same man who had sworn fidelity under a different altar. And now, here he was, about to do it again. The officiant cleared his throat, his voice calm and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the bride." A collective rustle swept the ballroom as chairs scraped against the marble floor. Sarah rose with the others, her knees trembling. Then Emily appeared. She was radiant in white silk, her veil shimmering with tiny pearls, her bouquet of roses and orchids trembling slightly in her hands. Her smile glowed as she walked down the aisle, eyes fixed on David as though he were the only person in the world. The crowd sighed in admiration, camera phones lifted discreetly to capture the moment. Sarah's chest ached. Not from jealousy, but from the cruelty of it all. Emily was innocent. She wasn't the villain here, she was the victim, blind to the man waiting at the altar. Sarah gripped her clutch tighter, feeling the sharp edge of the folder inside. Proof. Truth. Dynamite. The bride reached the altar. David took her hand, pressing a kiss to her fingers. His smile widened, dazzling, rehearsed. Sarah nearly laughed at the performance of it all. The officiant began. Words about love, unity, promises. Words David had once spoken to Sarah under different chandeliers, in front of different witnesses. The phrases blurred together, heavy with irony. Sarah's heartbeat pounded louder than the music, louder than the words. When do I stand up? She thought. When do I end this charade? Her palms sweated. She imagined every possible outcome, gasps, shouts, security dragging her out, or worse, the crowd turning on her, believing David's lies over her truth. But she pushed the fear aside. The truth didn't need permission. It only needed courage. The officiant smiled warmly. David and Emily, have you prepared vows for one another? David nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity. Her husband, was about to promise forever to another woman while she sat less than 30 feet away. His voice carried through the room, smooth, confident. Emily, from the moment I met you, I knew my life had changed forever. You've brought me joy, laughter, and love I never thought possible. Sarah's nails dug into her palm. Every word was poison, each sentence a dagger. She glanced at Emily, whose eyes glistened with tears of happiness. Then the officiant turned to Emily. And you, Emily, your vows. Emily's voice was soft, trembling with emotion. David, you're my partner, my safe place, my future. Today I give you my whole heart. Sarah's breath hitched. Safe place. Her stomach churned. She wanted to scream, to run to the front and tear the veil from Emily's face, shake her awake. But not yet. The officiant continued. If there is anyone here who believes these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The words hung heavy in the air. This was it. The moment. Sarah's legs moved before her brain caught up. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing through the silence. Every head turned. Gasps rippled like waves. David's face went pale, his mouth falling open. Emily blinked, confused, her bouquet lowering slowly. Sarah walked down the aisle with steady steps, her crimson gown blazing against the pristine white decor. She stopped just short of the altar, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. My name, she said clearly, her voice strong despite the quake in her chest, is Sarah Miller. And I am David's wife. The room erupted. Guests gasped, whispers surged like wildfire. Phones rose higher, recording. Emily's lips parted in horror. Wife. David stammered, his charm shattered. Sarah, what the hell are you doing here? Sarah held up the clutch, her voice sharp as steel. Ending your performance. And in that moment, the ballroom wasn't a wedding anymore. It was a courtroom. And David Miller was on trial. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Guests leaned forward in their chairs, whispering furiously, their eyes darting between Sarah in her crimson dress and David frozen at the altar. Camera phones lifted higher, recording every second. It was no longer a wedding, it was a scandal being broadcast live to hundreds of pairs of eyes. Emily's face drained of color, her bouquet trembling in her hands. What do you mean?" she whispered, staring at Sarah as though the floor had just disappeared beneath her feet. Sarah didn't flinch. She stepped closer to the altar, her clutch gripped tightly in her hands. "I mean exactly what I said," she declared, her voice steady. "David Miller is my husband. We've been married for 8 years. Gasps swept through the crowd. David raised his hands defensively, his voice desperate but cracking. "She's lying. She's obsessed with me. I ended things years ago, she can't let go." Sarah laughed bitterly, pulling a manila envelope from her clutch. "Ended things? Funny. I must have missed the memo when you kissed me goodbye just last week before your business trip to Chicago." She flipped open the folder and held up a glossy photograph. It showed David and Sarah at their anniversary dinner just 2 months ago, their hands intertwined across the table, a small cake in front of them with "Happy 8 Years" written in icing. The room went dead silent. David's confident mask cracked. His jaw tightened, his eyes darting to the guests, to Emily, then back to Sarah. That's nothing. Just an old picture." "Old?" Sarah's voice dripped with venom. She pulled out another sheet, a copy of their joint tax return, signed just 6 months earlier. "This old too? Or maybe the mortgage we still pay together on our house in Denver?" She let the papers fall one by one to the floor, each fluttering like a dagger through David's lies. Emily staggered backward, her face pale, her lips trembling. "David, is this true?" David reached for her, desperation now overtaking arrogance. "Emily, listen to me. She's twisting everything. Yes, I was married, but it's over. We've been separated." "Separated?" Sarah cut him off sharply. "Then maybe explain this." She held up her phone, the screen glowing with a recent text thread. Dozens of messages from David: "Good night, Sarah. I'll call when I land. Love you." Another from 3 days ago: "Miss you already." Emily stared at the screen as Sarah scrolled through the evidence, tears welling in her eyes. Her bouquet slipped from her fingers, petals scattering across the marble like fallen promises. "You told me you were divorced," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "You said your marriage ended years ago." David's facade collapsed completely. Sweat glistened at his temple, his breathing quickened. "Emily, I was going to tell you. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to hurt anyone." "Hurt anyone?" Sarah's voice cracked with fury. "You've been living 2 lives, David. Lying to me, lying to her, pretending you're some noble man. You didn't care who you hurt, as long as you got what you wanted." The officiant, awkward and pale, cleared his throat, but no one was listening. The guests were riveted, their whispers now like a tidal wave. "How could he? Did you hear that? Married for 8 years. Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't even know who you are." She stepped back from him, her veil trembling with every shaky breath. David reached for her, panic in his eyes. "Emily, please, don't listen to her. You're the one I love. She's just bitter, she can't let go." Sarah's laugh was cold, sharp. "Love? Is that what you call it when you sneak away from business trips to spend nights in my bed? When you make promises to both of us in the same week?" The word struck like lightning, and the crowd gasped again. Emily's sob turned into a choked scream. She ripped the engagement ring from her finger and hurled it at David's chest. "You disgust me." The diamond clattered across the marble floor, spinning before coming to a dead stop. David bent down instinctively to pick it up, but when he looked up, all he saw were hundreds of eyes burning into him, angry, disgusted, betrayed. Sarah stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. "The truth always comes out, David. You thought you could live two lives, but today, in front of everyone you tried to impress, the mask finally slipped. Emily turned and ran down the aisle, her sobs echoing through the ballroom. A bridesmaid rushed after her, heels clattering. David stretched a hand toward her retreating figure. "Emily, wait, please." But no one moved to help him. The groomsmen shifted uncomfortably, the officiant closed his book, and the guests leaned back, watching the wreckage unfold like a slow-motion car crash. Sarah gathered the remaining papers, her voice quieter now but still resolute. "This wedding is over." And with that, she turned and walked back down the aisle, the same aisle Emily had just fled. Only Sarah's walk wasn't one of escape. It was victory. Behind her, David Miller stood in silence, his empire of lies reduced to rubble before an audience of hundreds. By the time Sarah walked out of the ballroom, the story was already leaving the confines of the gilded hotel walls. Guests had uploaded clips to TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook within seconds. The hashtags multiplied like wildfire, #WeddingFromHell, #DoubleLifeDavid, #RunEmilyRun. Millions of strangers who had never heard the name David Miller before were now dissecting his downfall in real time. Inside the hotel, chaos reigned. Emily had locked herself in the bridal suite, mascara streaked down her cheeks, her bridesmaids huddling outside like soldiers guarding the wreckage of a broken heart. "She won't open the door," one whispered, panic in her eyes. "She just keeps crying." David, meanwhile, paced furiously in a side corridor, his tie hanging loose, his face blotched red with shame. His phone buzzed relentlessly, missed calls, texts from colleagues, even messages from his mother. Every alert was a reminder that his private double life was now a global spectacle. He answered one call, his voice sharp. "It's not true. She's lying, just bitter." But as he spoke, he saw a video thumbnail on Twitter, Sarah holding up the tax return, her voice echoing across the ballroom. The caption read, "Receipts don't lie." David's blood ran cold. Across the city, Sarah sat in her car, the engine off, her hands trembling. She wasn't celebrating, not yet. She stared at herself in the rearview mirror, the weight of what she'd done pressing down. 8 years of lies had ended in 15 minutes of public truth. Her phone dinged. Messages flooded in, some from friends, some from strangers. "You're a hero. Finally exposing the cheater. That was savage, Queen." Others were darker, "You should be ashamed airing this in public. You ruined a woman's wedding day." Sarah closed her eyes, exhaustion replacing adrenaline. She hadn't done this for fame or for revenge. She had done it because David thought he could erase her life, her marriage, her dignity, as if she were disposable. Now the whole world knew he wasn't the perfect man he pretended to be. By the next morning, David's name was plastered across online news outlets. "Business consultant caught living double life at own wedding," one headline screamed. "Bride abandoned at altar after wife crashes ceremony," read another. Photos of Emily sobbing in her gown circulated like wildfire, paired with clips of Sarah holding up evidence. Talk shows debated who was the bigger victim, the wife who'd been betrayed for years or the fiancé left shattered on her wedding day. David's company issued a cold statement, "We take integrity seriously." At this time, David Miller is on indefinite leave of absence. It was corporate speak for "you're done." Emily hadn't left her apartment in days. Reporters swarmed outside, shouting questions every time the door cracked open. She'd turned off her phone, unable to bear the notifications. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore, it was public, dissected by millions of strangers who knew her name, her face, her pain. She sat curled on her couch, staring at the engagement ring she'd thrown at David. Somehow, it had ended up back in her purse when she fled the hotel. Now it sat on the coffee table, catching the morning light, mocking her. Her mother rubbed her shoulder gently. "Sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. This isn't your shame to carry." Emily shook her head, tears brimming. "But everyone saw, everyone knows. I was about to marry a man who already had a wife. How could I be so blind? Her mother pulled her into an embrace. Because you loved him. And love makes us see the best in people, even when they don't deserve it. David, desperate to salvage something, called Emily relentlessly. Voicemail after voicemail, his voice cracked with pleading. Emily, please, you have to believe me. She twisted everything. I love you. You're the one I want a future with. Don't let her lies ruin us. But even as he spoke, the world outside grew harsher. Former clients dropped him. Friends avoided his calls. Every time he stepped outside, he felt the eyes of strangers burning into him, as if they already knew his secret. Because they did. One evening, sitting alone in his dim apartment, David scrolled through his phone. A video with over 10 million views replayed Sarah's words, "This wedding is over." For the first time, David realized his carefully constructed double life wasn't just shattered, it was broadcast, archived, and immortalized. He couldn't hide anymore. Sarah, meanwhile, found herself at the center of an unexpected storm. News producers reached out, offering interviews. Podcasters called her the woman who exposed the groom. Some begged her to sell her story for 6 figures. But Sarah refused. She wasn't interested in monetizing her pain. All she wanted was freedom from the man who thought he could manipulate her forever. She filed for divorce the very next morning, sliding the paperwork across the lawyer's desk with shaking hands. The lawyer gave her a sympathetic look. You realize this will be messy. He's already scrambling to protect what little reputation he has left. Sarah's gaze hardened. Let him scramble. I've lived in the shadows of his lies for 8 years. I'm done. By the end of the week, the world had moved on to the next viral scandal. But for David, Emily, and Sarah, the fallout was just beginning. Emily had to piece her life back together, scarred but wiser. Sarah braced for the legal war that would follow. And David. David faced the ruins of everything he thought he controlled. Because when the truth finally comes out, it doesn't just whisper. It roars. The weeks that followed were a blur of headlines, court filings, and emotional wreckage. The viral storm had begun to calm, but the scars it left behind were permanent. Each of the 3 lives entangled in David's deception was moving forward, though not at the same pace, and not in the same direction. Emily's healing. Emily stayed with her parents for a while, far away from the downtown apartment she had once shared with David during their engagement. Her bridal gown still hung in the closet, untouched, like a ghost haunting her every time she opened the door. At first, she couldn't face the world. The whispers at coffee shops, the pitying glances from strangers, the endless, "Are you okay?" text messages, it was too much. But slowly, she began to reclaim herself. One morning, she looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back, hollow eyes, brittle smile, a heart that still carried the sting of betrayal. She touched her own reflection gently. "You deserve better," she whispered. Therapy sessions became her sanctuary. Week by week, Emily began unpacking not only David's lies but her own blind trust. She journaled every night, sometimes crying onto the pages, sometimes writing in furious capital letters, "Never ignore the red flags again." Her friends rallied around her, taking her out for brunches, distracting her with laughter. It was awkward at first, everyone tiptoeing around the scandal, but eventually, Emily found herself laughing again. Genuine, unforced. It was a small victory, but it mattered. The day she boxed up the ring and mailed it back to David was the day she felt a weight lift off her chest. She didn't need it anymore. She didn't need him. Sarah's resolve. Sarah threw herself into the divorce proceedings with a determination she hadn't felt in years. Her lawyer warned her it would be long and ugly. David wasn't about to give up without a fight, but Sarah had something she hadn't had before, proof, and the courage to use it. For so long, she had lived in David's shadow, manipulated by his half-truths and excuses. Now, she refused to be silenced. During one meeting with her attorney, Sarah laid out the stack of evidence, the texts, the financial records, the photographs. Her hands shook, not with fear this time, but with the adrenaline of justice. "Do you want to pursue alimony?" the lawyer asked. Sarah hesitated, then shook her head. "No. I don't want a cent of his money. I just want freedom. And I want him to know he doesn't own me anymore." Outside of the courtroom, Sarah focused on rebuilding. She reconnected with old friends David had driven away. She started painting again, something she hadn't touched since college. Canvases filled her small apartment, each stroke a reminder that her life was hers to shape. Her inbox still overflowed with interview requests, offers to sell her story. She ignored them all. She didn't need the world's validation. For once, Sarah was writing her own narrative, not living inside David's. David's downfall. David, meanwhile, was spiraling. His polished reputation, once the envy of colleagues, was in ruins. Clients had dropped him. His company had cut ties. His apartment felt more like a cage than a home. He spent hours refreshing his phone, desperate to see if the online storm had passed. But the internet never forgets. The videos, the hashtags, the memes, each one a reminder of his failure. Strangers dissected his lies as if they knew him better than he knew himself. Every time he tried to defend himself online, the backlash was swift and merciless. "Stop lying. Own up to what you did. You ruined 2 women's lives." David had always thrived on control, controlling his image, his relationships, his future. Now, control had slipped through his fingers, and no matter how hard he clawed, it wouldn't return. Late at night, he replayed the moment over and over, Sarah standing in the ballroom, papers in hand, her voice cutting through the silence. Emily's tear-streaked face as she hurled the ring at him. He couldn't escape it. The worst part wasn't the internet. It wasn't the financial losses or the public shaming. It was the silence. Emily had cut him off completely. Sarah wouldn't even look at him in court. For the first time in his life, David Miller was truly alone. Parallel paths. Months later, their paths diverged completely. Emily stood on a cliffside trail in California, hiking boots dusty, hair blowing in the ocean breeze. She had joined a women's retreat, rediscovering not only her strength but her joy. As she looked out at the horizon, she realized something she hadn't believed for a long time: the future could still be beautiful. Sarah held a paintbrush in her hand, her canvas splashed with colors that screamed freedom. The apartment smelled of turpentine and fresh flowers. For the first time in 8 years, she wasn't waiting for anyone to come home. She was home. And David? He sat in his empty apartment, staring at a news article about another scandal that had replaced his in the public eye. The world had moved on. But he was still stuck in the ruins of his choices. Because betrayal doesn't just destroy trust. It destroys the betrayer too. It was nearly a year after the ruined wedding when their paths finally crossed again, not in a ballroom, not in a courtroom, but in the quiet corner of a coffee shop in downtown Denver. Sarah had been sketching in her notebook, her latte half finished, when she looked up and froze. Across the room, slumped over a chipped mug of black coffee, was David. He looked nothing like the man who once charmed rooms full of people. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, dark circles hollowed his eyes. He was thinner, smaller somehow, as if the weight of the past year had carved away his arrogance and left only a shell. For a moment, Sarah debated slipping out quietly. But something inside her shifted. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. He had no power over her. So she stood, walked calmly across the cafe, and stopped at his table. David's head lifted slowly. His eyes widened, then flickered with shame. "Sarah." She nodded once. "David." An awkward silence stretched between them. The hiss of the espresso machine, the chatter of other customers, it all faded into the background. Finally, David spoke, his voice hoarse. "I never got to say. I'm sorry." Sarah tilted her head, studying him. "Sorry for lying. For humiliating me. For trying to erase me from your life. Or sorry you got caught." His eyes dropped to the table. He had no defense left. "All of it," he murmured. For the first time, Sarah didn't feel anger. She didn't feel the old ache of betrayal. She felt pity. "You destroyed yourself, David. Not me. Not Emily. You." He flinched at Emily's name. Have you seen her?" Sarah shook her head. "No. But I know she's better off without you. We both are." David swallowed hard, his hands trembling around his mug. "I thought I could have everything. 2 lives, 2 women, 2 futures. I thought I was smart enough to keep it all together. And now?" Sarah asked softly. He looked up at her, eyes hollow. "Now I've got nothing." Sarah didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had closure, not from his apology, but from seeing what his choices had cost him. She placed a few dollars on his table, more than enough to cover his coffee, then straightened her shoulders. "Goodbye, David." And with that, she walked out. She didn't look back. Emily's new beginning. Across the country, Emily was stepping into a new chapter of her life. She had moved to San Francisco, taken a new job, and surrounded herself with people who valued honesty. On her birthday, her friend surprised her with a small cake. As she blew out the candles, she realized something. For the first time in a long time, her wish wasn't to be loved by someone else. It was to keep loving herself enough never to settle for less again. She smiled, feeling the strength she had fought to rebuild. David's shadow no longer reached her. She was free. Sarah's transformation. Meanwhile, Sarah's art had begun to attract attention. What started as therapy had become a new career. Her paintings, abstract but raw, spoke of pain, resilience, and liberation. One gallery owner told her, "Your work feels like survival on canvas." Sarah smiled. That's exactly what it is. At her first solo exhibition, she stood in front of a piece titled Breaking Chains. It was bold, jagged, full of fire and light. Strangers admired it, not knowing the story behind it. But Sarah knew. It was her story. And she had rewritten it on her own terms. The message. As months turned into years, the viral storm faded from public memory. But for the 3 people at its center, the lessons remained. Emily learned that love without honesty is nothing more than illusion. Sarah discovered that reclaiming her life was the greatest victory of all. And David. David lived with the echo of his own choices, a man who thought he could cheat the truth, only to be crushed by it. Because betrayal isn't just about infidelity. It's about arrogance, selfishness, and the belief that lies can last forever. But the truth always comes. Sometimes quietly, sometimes violently, but it comes. And when it does, it doesn't just break hearts. It breaks the liar too. That night, Sarah wrote in her journal, the final entry about David she would ever make. Closure isn't hearing someone say sorry. Closure is realizing you no longer need it. He destroyed his world. I built mine back stronger. That's the real ending. She closed the book, turned off the light, and slept peacefully, for the first time in years. The chapter was over.